Kafka needs no introduction. You're pulling for her, and I know why you're pulling for her. This will be the only video you need to understand Kafka and all of her supports from the inside out. Kafka's a nihility unit that focuses on and amplifies damage over time effects. In short, dots. Her skill, Caressing Moonlight, deals blast lightning damage, and all dots currently placed on those enemies will produce a percentage of their original damage. This means that you don't have to wait for your enemies' turns for the dots to proc. You want to have multiple characters on your team that can apply dots so that Kafka can maximize her skill. Kafka's ultimate, Twilight Trill, deals AoE lightning damage and applies shock, and all enemies hit will immediately receive damage based on all the current dots that are placed on them from her A2 ability, CBT. I mean torture. Just torture. Every turn, Kafka can make a follow-up attack with their talent if one of her allies uses their basic attack. Kafka's talent also applies the same shock from her ultimate. Most of Kafka's damage comes from her shock dots, since it has an absurd motion value, or percentage. Your goal while playing Kafka is to set up dots to proc with their skill, as well as making at least one person in your party basic attack every turn. Combat skill priority. You will never use Kafka's basic, so leave that at level 1. The order goes as such: ultimate, skill, and then talent. But I know you're going to upgrade all of those anyway. For her relic build, the best relic set for Kafka is the Band of Sizzling Thunder and Space Sealing Station. She wants as much attack percent as possible, and these relics help achieve just that. Some people might suggest you build Pan-Galactic on Kafka, but it would be suboptimal, since you only need a maximum of 29% EHR on Kafka to guarantee her dot. Usually for dot units, it's 67%, but Kafka has her A6 trace, Thorns, to help with it. I could give a short math class for the calculations, but I feel like you'd just skip 5 seconds ahead anyway. Stacking attack percent on dot units will lead to more damage than effect hit rate on average, but it's a lot less consistent in hitting the dots. You can just stack attack percent on Kafka and pick up effect hit rate substats along the way. The most important thing to keep in mind while building Kafka is that you shouldn't build crit. Most of her damage comes from her dots, and dots do not crit. Sure, it makes her front-loaded damage deal more, but attack percent is way more valuable on her in the long run. This makes Kafka easy to build because relics roll attack percent more often than crit on main stats. You should build attack percent on her body, speed on her boots, electric damage percent on her sphere, and attack percent on her rope. Kit dots versus break dots. Here's an important concept you need to grasp. Kit dots are dots that are applied by things like Sampo's talent, Serval's skill, and Kafka's ultimate. These things usually scale with attack percent and are affected by the elemental damage percent on spheres. Break dots are dots that are applied when you deplete an enemy's toughness. Kit dots can stack with one another, and this is where most of Kafka's skill damage will come from. Break dots are just a bonus, and multiple break dots can't stack with one another either. Let's move on to her light cones. There's a lot of interlap within the nihility light cones for your team. The light cones in Kafka's banner are great, and I highly suggest you pull there to get some of them. Kafka's best light cone is Patience is all you need. No surprise there, but it does introduce mechanics that can be quite problematic for your team. Kafka wants to be a little bit slower than your other dot applier, and Patience is all you need gives her a stacking speed buff, so there's a chance that she might overlap with your dot appliers, which can lead to her going first, making her dot reapplication less efficient on the first turn. I suggest you put Patience is all you need if you got it on Sampo, and put something like Good Night and Sleep Well or Eyes of the Prey on Kafka. And of course, the very sus Kafka light cone Fermata. Sadly though, none of the 3-star light cones are good on Kafka. Good Night is better than Eyes of the Prey once it's stacked, while Eyes of the Prey provides raw stats that Kafka wants. Anyone can get S5 Fermata through the memory store, but it's quite easily eclipsed by S3 of the light cones that I talked about. Let's discuss speed for a bit. All your dot appliers want a little bit of speed, but you should make sure that Kafka goes after all the others, so that she can amplify their dots with her skill. You should aim for around 107 to 134 speed for most of your units, and make Kafka lag just a little bit behind them, which should be easy since she's already slower than Sampo by 2 points. But there are so many sources of enemy slows and action delays that you shouldn't really worry about all this too much in higher MOC stages. Remember that you don't need to hit exact speed breakpoints as well. Now on to team building. Kafka's teams are very F2P friendly, since almost all of the current dot appliers are 4 stars and most of the units that she likes are on her banner already. Your base team should always be Kafka and a consistent dot applier. These would be Sampo, Luca, and Serval. The next unit is going to be your flex unit. You can put another dot applier here like the ones mentioned before, but you can also put in Pela, Asta, and Tingyun. Don't run Bronya or Yukong since both of them are very SP hungry, and both boost crit, which neither Kafka nor Sampo need. And finally, you need a healer or a shielder. If you have Gepard, Bailu, or Lotcha, they can easily sustain the entire team. If your Natasha can't hold the team together, then you can sacrifice the flex unit to give way for the classic combo of Natasha Fire Blazer. Let's talk about her supports. Lucas' damage is single target, but his bleeds deal a ridiculous amount of damage that scales with the enemy's max HP, which can obliterate elite enemies and bosses. He also has a damage percent amplification on his ultimate. The only downside to him is that you need to upgrade most of his combat skills since they're all somewhat valuable. Serval can extend Kafka's shocks and allow permanent shock uptime if you time Serval's ultimate right before Kafka's shock runs out. And both of their shocks stack, and Serval's talent procs off Kafka's shocks as well. 4 shocks in one sentence, much like how many shocks your enemies will receive each cycle. But for real though, I think Serval's shock extension is going to be useless since 4 turns is a really long time, and you most likely would have killed your enemies by then, or you've already passed the cycle limit for MOC. In which case, sorry for your loss. Pela's AoE def percent shred is unmatched and is still great even with low investment. Not to mention, Pela has her secret strategy, which boosts all allies EHR by 10%, which is great since both Kafka and Sampo need that for more consistent DOTs. Keep in mind that her def percent shred affects dot damage, so even if she herself doesn't look like she's doing much, she definitely is. Asta is great due to her being able to apply burn. She can also boost Kafka and Sampo's attack percent, which makes their dots way more potent. Asta also has her speed boost on her ultimate, which allows you to take attack percent boots instead of speed boots. All of this might seem underwhelming, but if you take into account that she essentially gives a 113% attack boost, Asta is nothing to scoff at. Everyone's already decided that Tingyun is S tier, so I don't even need to explain why you'd want her. Tingyun boosts Kafka's attack percent, damage percent, and allows Kafka to do a 2-turn ultimate rotation every time Tingyun's ultimate is up. I personally recommend you either use Sampo or Luca, and Asta or Pela, but at the end of the day, just use who you like. And of course, the one you have the most eidolons on. But I'll keep talking as if Sampo is a mandatory unit on our teams, because it's one of the few times where there's actually a niche use for a D tier unit. And here's an entire section dedicated to Sampo in this Kafka video. Why? Because Sampo is an important party member for Kafka. Not only does his wind shear stack up to 5 times, but he also increases your party's dot damage through his ultimate. You need 67% EHR to land his ultimate's debuff, but his wind shear procs have an abysmal base chance, so you actually need 157% EHR to guarantee you hit all of his wind shear. Of course, 157% is an absurd goal and should only serve as the maximum. I suggest that you build up to 100% EHR and run Pan-Galactic Commercial Enterprise to get the most value on him, so that the set bonus adds some attack percent that scales off your EHR percent. Him and all the other dot appliers will have the same main stat loadout as Kafka, and the only difference is that Sampo wants a little bit more EHR than the rest of them. And speaking of percents, only 2% of you are subscribed. If you like my content, please go ahead and subscribe as it helps the channel. You can always change your mind later. If you want to support me further, I have a Ko-fi that I do account reviews and MOC advice on. Thanks. As I've said before, you might want to run Patience is all you need on Sampo, and that the erosion effect on the light cone can be applied well through Sampo's Ricochet Love, since it applies the effect on each hit of his bounce ability. Though if you don't have Patience, then you should run Resolution Shines as Pearls of Sweat, because it can also be applied with his skill. Oh boy, let's talk about Team Break Effect. The way it works is that when a character breaks an enemy, only their break effect is calculated. This means that if any other character breaks the enemy, you'll lose quite a bit of potential damage. If you can manage to consistently break enemies with one of your characters, you should run Fermata on them. I personally do not recommend building break effect at all to save your sanity from timing breaks, but in the case that you do, I recommend you make Luca or Sampo your breakers, because Physical and Wind both have high break damage, and the characters have high toughness damage. I highly suggest you don't build break effect on Kafka, due to Lightning Break lagging behind damage when compared to Physical and Wind. Physical's break multipliers 2 times, Wind's is 1.5 times, and Lightning is only 1 times. I'd say it's about average. Now, for the rotation, Sampo will go before Kafka and keep spamming his skill Ricochet Love until the enemy is at 5 stack wind shear. And he can use his basic if you need someone to proc Kafka's talent. He can go SP neutral and get his ult up every 5 turns or 4 turns if you have his E1. Your flex unit can go before or after Sampo and apply their dots, debuffs, or buffs before Kafka so that your skill benefits from them. Kafka will always use her skill Caressing Moonlight and never use her basic. She will have her ultimate up every 3 turns if you proc her talent properly. Just keep in mind that at least one unit will have to basic attack every turn to capitalize off this. And for your healer, they'll just basic spam and only heal when needed. Unless of course you're on Jeopard, in which he'll just stand still. Alright, time to conclude. Kafka looks really fun to use, and even though she doesn't have those big nuke damage numbers, she's still pretty good because her banner gives her an entire team for you to play with right off the bat. I would say she's A tier and very F2P friendly. Her damage requires a bit of setup, but I know that most of you are pulling for a different reason entirely anyway. My name is Kite, and I'll see you when Dunhung Imbibitor Linnae comes out. I'm already preparing a video for him, and Push 1. See ya!